First, though, here's a question for you. Could Tory tax cuts win your vote? 0207 862 2222. We'd love to talk to you. Both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor used columns in the Sunday papers to tease tax cuts in the next few months. Writing in the Mail on Sunday, Jeremy Hunt promised he would bring in an economic boom and shared his hopes to be like, name drop coming, Nigel Lawson, the Chancellor who was known for slashing personal taxes in Thatcher's government. So let's just have a look here at some political history and try and put Lawson into context. The thing that Conservatives always threw at Labour in the 80s was this. In the 70s, under the Wilson government, which started in 74, the top income tax rate was 83%. But if you add to that an extra 15 for investment income, you got to a tax rate for some money of 98%. And from that 98% figure, Thatcher was born, right? And Thatcher comes to power, and her two key money men, Geoffrey Howe and Nigel Lawson, two key chancellors. And her idea is you slash taxes and everyone will work harder because they are taking home more of their own money. All right, and on that basis, she won in 79, she won bigger in 83, and even bigger in 87. So 3 elections to Thatcher. And in 87, she said to Lawson, right, the next budget is the big one. So the 88 budget is what we're talking about here, and it was called the giveaway budget, the nickname. And here's what he did. Cut the top rate of tax, which was 60p. No one anywhere pays more than 40. And then the basic rate of income tax for lower paid people, 27p cut to 25. That was a massive policy for Thatcher. A whole load of other cuts as well. Personal tax allowance jumps way more than inflation. Corporation tax cuts, inheritance tax cuts. Now, could Jeremy Hunt do something like this? Well, before you get too excited, Mr. Hunt, let me say something. Truss tried it. She did it in a day. She was gone in a month. Even Thatcher was out of office 2 years later after this giveaway budget. And there was a particular moment in the House of Commons, which I just mentioned, when the budget was happening in 88, a young guy called Alex Salmond stood up and said, this is an obscenity. There was so much hoo-ha in the Commons, they had to clear the floor. He says it's an obscenity because if you cut taxes, there'll be no money to rescue the NHS. So we're back very much with the same themes now. Nelufar, do you think he should go Lawson, Jeremy Hunt? Do what Nigel Lawson did?
I don't think so. If we're going to look at sort of where he is today, the Britain he inherits today or he's working with today is very different to the Britain that was back then. There are some similarities in terms of the discontent that most people feel, irrespective of whether they're working sort of on the train line or in nursing homes. There's a lot of discontent. The question here isn't, I struggle with that 98% figure because it's not all of your income was
No, of course. It's a particularly investment income on particular shares.
It's the proper, that's the language that we now live with, and that's not true. Taxing wealth is different to taxing income, I get that. But one thing I want to be very clear on, when we do tax cuts, we all become poorer because there's less money in the government
James as soon as you said that, James did a... What?
I expect him to, but I can make my point.
Why would someone become poorer if they're richer?
I didn't say someone. That individualistic sense in us makes we think, oh, the tax rate has gone down. That's fantastic. Well, you'd have to earn £100,000 before you benefit from that tax cut in the first place, or if you're in the higher rate. So when we reduce taxes, it's less money for the collective, for all of us to fund our NHS, to make sure that we have a running, functioning civil service, to do all sorts of things.
OK, I understand. You've made a point. James, how do you answer that?
I think there are so many areas in which utter claptrap has been just spilt there that I almost don't know where to start. The point is that...
Well, hang on, let me start with this point. If you cut taxes, everyone gets poorer.
You see, that's only the case if the money that is being spent by the government or by local government is all being spent effectively. And the point is that it's not. So, in my view, you have to start with making sure that money is spent effectively. And where we would probably agree
How are we disagreeing there? Making sure the money that we have is spent well is not the same as saying let's not spend any money, is it?
No. But the thing is that if you're starting to say that you can't cut taxes because you're going to cut services, if that money is being spent more effectively and you're wasting less, then it means that you can have more for less. The second point is that we have some very significant tax differences between here and the 80s. So, for example, VAT was not at 20%. We didn't have the stamp duty that I have on people's homes. We didn't have the allowances, which have been kept at the same level for many years, which are an effectively stealth tax.
All wiped out by things like inflation, all wiped out by things like the cost of living crisis. In that case, if you're so vehemently against kind of making sure that the government is well funded, why don't we have a wealth tax? Taxing income is very, very different to taxing wealth. We have had more billionaires minted on this planet.
But we do have a range of wealth taxes.
We have had more billionaires minted in this planet during the pandemic than at any other time.
Okay, but you won't be able to touch them. You will not be able to touch them.
This is a conversation about should we, not will we.
Well, no,
I think we absolutely
no,
should.
but this is about will, because
right,
here's
we've got
the point.
177 billionaires in London, James. 177.
Yes, but
You've
the
got
thing
to fill
is,
their pockets.
Yes, but as soon as you start to do the measures, and I quite agree, people should pay their relative fair shares of tax, but we also have double tax treaties with other countries. So the whole point is whether or not you can tax people twice.
Nelufar, let's just go to some calls.
So,
Jeanette in Durham, hello. Hi, Jeanette.
It's Manchester.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So it's Jeanette in Manchester. I do beg your pardon. Hello, what would you like to say?
I would appreciate tax cuts. I have voted Tory in the past. I was wavering this time. But I think I would want to have a look at more of the broader pictures to see how some of these other promises pan out, like immigration and interest rates, and I think I would take it overall.
What about the idea, just on the tax cuts, OK, you get to keep more of your own money, but maybe your local hospital has less as a result. Where's the balance there?
I think the NHS gets enough as it is. It's had so much money pumped into it, and until there's a lot more things done I work in the NHS itself, and I can tell you now, it's so inefficient, it's unbelievable. Wow. So I'm sorry, I would rather have the tax cuts. The NHS needs to be organised completely before it should get anything else.
Nelufar?
Janet, I fully appreciate. I'm not going to tell you what to do. If you work in the NHS, then you know the picture far better than me. I guess my question is it worth throwing out the baby with the bathwater? If the NHS doesn't work, does that mean that it can never work?
I don't think it will work at the moment until it's completely redone. It needs to be literally ripped out at the seams and completely reorganised.
That costs money, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That costs money.
It's not fit for purpose at the moment. There's too many people. I'm actually going private myself. I can't afford it. Yeah. But I'm actually paying to go private.
So what? I'm guessing a hip or a knee or what, Jeanette?
Well, no, I had a recent cancer scare.
Okay.
I had to go private.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Steve, for your call. I wish you well with that. We're talking about Sarah Ferguson later, who's got a skin cancer scare. But this is all about whether it's time for a big Tory tax cut. And if they do it, will they win the election? 0207 862 2222. Loads of calls on this. We'll see you shortly. Now, your calls on Jeremy Hunt's tax cuts tease. Will it win your vote? Basically, the idea, he goes for Nigel Lawson's policy, which was a full hell for leather tax slashing. And let's talk to Siobhan in Bournemouth. What do you think about this? They really think you're going for it?
Well, what for? I prefer to have the £2,000 that people used to get if they died before they collected their pension. I'd like to see people able to get their ears cleaned before an audiology appointment, so pensioners can actually hear and not frightened of going to get help if they're going deaf. I'd like to see the emergency lift to 20% on VAT that George Osborne brought in. I'd like to see that lowered. There's all sorts of things they could be doing with that money. They've been stealing things off taxpayers for the last 13 years. Put those things back and then see how much money you've got left over.
Thank you, Siobhan. Sylvia in Durham, would you want to see tax cuts?
No, I don't think tax cuts will get the Conservatives back into government. I think the biggest fear this country's got is the National Health Service. There is no National Health Service. You're still getting phone calls from people like doctors, and you cannot diagnose a person over a phone. And when you've got people who are in chronic pain day in and day out, and they can't get the medical help they need.
Sure. I think we all agree that it's in a terrible state in lots of places in the country, Sylvia. The question is whether, if you pour more money into it, it gets better. Because at the moment, there's no evidence for that.
Yeah, but perhaps it'd be a good idea if this stopped. For the last 13 years, the Conservative have been pushing the private sector into the National Health Service sector, and it has collapsed to the ground. And it's not the people who work within the National Health Service, they're doing the job as best as they can. It's the Conservatives have totally and utterly ruined the National Health Service and this country as a whole.
Thank you. Christopher in Northumberland, would you vote for tax cuts?
Well, firstly, I wouldn't vote Conservative because I'm Liberal Democrat.
Well, you might be persuaded. You might be persuaded.
Sorry?
You might be persuaded over.
Absolutely not. The most worrying thing about this government is that they don't actually seem to understand how the inland revenue system works. I'm an ex-civil servant. I wasn't Inland Revenue. I was Ministry of Pensions and National Insurance. Okay. It's quite simple. People are taxed on the amount of money they physically received. There is a personal allowance. There's an argument for raising the personal allowance possibly to £20,000, and that would take a lot of people out of the tax system altogether. But, of course, everybody is subject to the personal allowance, however much they earn. The more you earn, the wealthier you are. If you're a big corporation, you have broader shoulders, you pay more tax. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, but why are you telling... I mean, this is not a surprise, Christopher. James, what are you disagreeing with there?
Christopher, you're actually technically incorrect, because if you earn it's over 100,000 or so, then you lose your personal allowance, which actually increases your net effective tax rate to 60% on some amounts.
So hang on, just a minute, Nelufar.
So I think that's the point.
Forgive me, you've done a brilliant explanation of how tax works, but what's the purpose of it?
There's also another factor which needs to be factored into this, and those are the tax havens. Every single tax haven should be shut down immediately.
Not going to happen.
Not going to happen, Chris.
Immediately. The EU wanted to do that, and that's why this government, which aren't actually Conservatives, they're actually a UKIP government, are against...
Why is it so incomprehensible? Why is it so difficult for us to imagine taxing wealth as though it's an impossibility, like it's not going to happen, not going to happen? Why can't
tax havens?
I understand tax havens, and I understand this, but we also understand that how interest is paid, how we own stocks and shares, how we own stocks and shares. We know that there is a difference between taxing the bottom, things like income allowance or increasing that or lowering it, but we're not worried about the top. Why am I not hearing about the tax increases at the top as much as I am?
How are you going to do it?
That's a great question. If you and I had a month to think about Smartest, I'm sure we could.
But the point is that you can't.
You need a world government.
Why can't you?
Because you've got to crack down on Belize. You've got to crack down on Jamaica. You've got to crack down... Ireland has a 0% corporate tax rate. You've got to crack down on other countries.
If you charge people based on what they are worth, their wealth, rather than what they keep in
that is a misunderstanding of the tax.
Absolutely isn't.
All right. Who have we got? Mo in London, David in Lincoln. David, you go first. Tax cuts now, ?
Yes, I believe the tax cuts would help. I work in procurement, and what I've witnessed over the past 28 years is that the government are using old-fashioned procurement rules, PCR 2015, which means that the money for the NHS has been spent unwisely.
OK, David, thank you. Mo in London, what do you want to say?
Yeah, 100% agree with some of the previous callers. It's unfair, the taxations that we've had to put up with depending on how much you earn. The problem is there's no actual representatives for the middle-class earners who are the majority taxpayers.
So middle income, you're talking about, what, 30, 40 grand or whatever?
Yeah, but between about 15 grand to as much as about 75 grand. There is no people or group that's going to look after us.
Well, if Jeremy Hunt slashes taxes on them, will they win the election?
I think they could go some ways into getting a lot more votes if they do that. I don't know if it'll be enough to win the election because there's so many people who are disappointed with them.
What about Nelufar's idea, which is that you go for the top and you look at who's got the wealth and you go around and you're going to have to kind of inspect the jewellery, right? And you're going to tax people on what they've already got, not on what they earn.
The problem is I don't think the higher earners are being taxed as much as they could be because they've got a lot of loopholes and they've got they can afford the accountants.
If we know what the loopholes are, Mo, if we know what the loopholes are, we can start thinking about closing them.
But you see, that's...
So the problem here, Mo, the problem here isn't that you and I aren't paying our fair share. It's the fact that those billionaires that live in a city like London, where you and I are from, aren't paying.
Yeah, but you see, that's
the fact that in the 70s, when I used to read my music magazines, I noticed all the people who were famous were abroad. Rod Stewart, the Stones. They all moved to France, actually, a lot, because just they moved for tax reasons. How do you stop them moving?
But they still earn here. They perform here.
No.
Of course they do.
Not,
Rod
but
Stewart's
that's
never
not...
performed in the United
Yeah,
Kingdom.
but here's the point. Here's the point, which I think is really important.
Please.
Is if you make a tax rate which is too high and people move away, so you have a larger percentage of zero, they will go away. They did it before.